So with that as our introduction, we're going to go on to our speakers. We're going to talk a little bit about PFAS. We'll talk a little bit about some places where it's found, and we're going to talk about some effects. So the first up is Erica Bloom. She is in environmental health and justice I guess she's trained at the University of Montana. I got to look at I can look over here. I'm going to look at way up like this at my screen, right? Originally from Michigan, she has worked in Michigan's environmental and food systems movement since 2010. She has experience in program development, policy, coalition building, and grant writing. She worked for the Michigan League of Conservation Voters before the transitioning to the Growing Hope in Ypsilanti, where she became assistant director. Now at the Ecology Center, she focuses on leading the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network and supporting projects through the organization's Healthy Stuff Lab. And let me just say, the Ecology Center, they do really good work. And what's really nice about them is helping you to understand as a consumer the things that you may be letting into your environment that may not be good for you. So when you have those particular questions, go and talk to them. So with that, Ms. Bloom, if you will take over, please tell us about PFAS 101 and yourself too, if you want.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to share my screen and then I'll talk a little bit more about myself and PFAS. Yeah, so I'm gonna talk about forever chemicals, which we all know is PFAS, and I'm gonna talk about the Great Lakes, but this presentation kind of goes beyond the Great Lakes. And I just wanted to say, when we say the word forever chemicals, kind of what we mean by that. That's often used in the media, or in the news, but it really just means that these are chemicals that really don't break down in the environment, and they circulate through our environment and in our bodies, and it is very hard to destroy these chemicals. So I just wanted to kind of start the presentation saying that's why it's been so challenging to address these chemicals, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that is. But yeah, as it's been said, I'm the Toxics Campaign Director at the Ecology Center, and I also lead the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network, which I will also talk about that later on. But that is a coalition started and co-led by impacted community members in Michigan, and so I support their work and through the Ecology Center. So PFAS is kind of this famous forever chemical, and it's a clunky acronym for a slick set of chemicals. And what it stands for is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And I'm just going to give a kind of a background on what these are. PFAS, it's not just one chemical, it's a class of over 15,000 and discovering more chemicals. And really only a small percent of these chemicals has been regulated in states, federally. And you could see here, this is two legacy PFAS, or PFAS that have been around for a long time and are regulated, which is PFOS, PFOS, and PFOA, PFOA. And you could see, I've learned a lot about PFAS and the chemistry over the years. They have a really strong carbon-fluorine bond, and that is why that's one of the strongest bonds. And so it's really hard to break down these chemicals. And that's kind of why, going back to the forever part of it. And so that causes a real problem because, it's as you'll see, they end up in places we really don't want these chemicals to be. There's a lot of uses for PFAS. Because they are really good at creating water-resistant coatings, non-stick, repelling, water, stain-resistant. They've been developed over decades, really, and put into so many of our household products and industrial uses. So they show up in things like our raincoats and food packaging, cookware, even dental floss, textiles, furniture, carpet. I mean, really, the more and more we look for PFAS, unfortunately, the more they show up. And I'll talk a little bit about policies later that have been addressing some of these uses, but it's really been just one of the most ubiquitous kind of chemicals out there. And as a result, we are all exposed. And PFAS is often called an emerging chemical, but it's really not. And at the Ecology Center, we kind of like to say, this chemical has been, class of chemicals have been around for a long time. And they've showed up in our blood actually for decades. There were animal studies, 3M knew that PFAS was getting out into the environment and getting into people's blood many, many years ago. But they were, kept secret, some of the harmful effects of this, and that it was out. And so that just kind of puts this into context that this, even though the science around the effects of PFAS and where PFAS is showing up is relatively newer, the actual chemicals have been in the environment for decades. So we've been exposed to these things for a long time. And they do circulate throughout the environment. And so if they start, in an industrial process like a chrome plating facility, that wastewater could end up in a wastewater treatment plant, which then some of the sludge of that could be then used as fertilizers on agricultural land. Some of those PFAS could be taken up by crops and ingested. Other ways that PFAS has entered our water is through firefighting foam used at airports and military bases to put out, foam to put out chemical fires, and then kind of just brushed off into the drains and gotten into groundwater. That has really, firefighting foam is a really big part of contamination. And so people who live around airports and military sites have been shown that are more largely exposed. Other ways, through industrial uses that have kind of dumped PFAS waste, like in landfills or illegally dumped, the leachate has gotten into groundwater or surface water. So you see there's lots of different ways that it can enter the environment, and through the water cycle and through, the flow of kind of our industrial waste, the PFAS kind of keeps circulating through. And then obviously as we are part of the environment, through water that we consume and through the food we eat and the air we breathe, all of that does enter through our bodies as well. So like I said, consumption of contaminated food and drinking water is really probably drinking contaminated water, I'd say, is like the largest source of where contamination can come from. And people who had been drinking, like residential well water for a long time without knowing that there were PFAS in the water have shown to have extremely high levels of PFAS in their blood. But other ways, just through, living in our built environments, in our, like I said, many of our household products have PFAS and can get into dust or, through water vapor, and there's many ways. So when we've actually shown like how many people have PFAS, there's, over like 98% of people in the US have had some level of PFAS in their blood. And it's really stored, right, in the blood, liver, kidneys, throughout the body. This is just a snapshot of kind of where contamination has been found. The Environmental Working Group is a national organization we work with, and they developed a map a few years ago about contaminated sites in drinking water. And you can see, since we're in Michigan, I like to highlight there's quite a few sites in Michigan that have been found. And part of that is because we are an industrial state and have had more exposure through PFAS using industries, firefighting foam. Another reason is, Michigan has done quite a bit of work, actually, the state of Michigan has spent quite a bit of resources actually looking for contamination. And typically when you look for PFAS, you will find it. And so both of those really show kind of some of the more industrialized areas on the East Coast, and you can see North Carolina, which has PFAS manufacturers there. But almost every state has some contamination. And I was getting to this, but there's in Michigan, we have some really high profile contaminated sites from industrial processes, landfills, chrome plating, and the firefighting foam. And through our PFAS Action Network, we work with community members who have been exposed in many of these communities. Our two co-chairs of our group live in communities where one is from a military base in Oscoda, Michigan, where they use the firefighting foam for many decades. And there are other co-chairs on the west side of Michigan where Wolverine Worldwide dumped tannery waste from they're a shoemaker. So they were dumping that into kind of landfills for decades before there was any regulation. And so that got into the groundwater. Where I live in the Ann Arbor Ypsilanti area, I live right off the Huron River, and there's do not eat the fish consumption advisories through the state, because they have sampled fish and have shown that there's such high levels in those fish that you really shouldn't eat any of the fish, which is a big deal in Michigan. As we're kind of known for our fishing and hunting and angling, and we have a big fishing economy. So and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the fish stuff, but it does affect us in all different ways. And the state of Michigan has done quite a bit to identify where the sites are. And they have a map through the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. And this is just kind of an overview. You can go to MPART, or Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, and look at all their resources. This is just a map of they have identified over 300 contaminated sites from, industrial uses, landfills, all the places I mentioned. So this is really just a snapshot. But if you really want to see the map, it's a GIS map. You can kind of look at different layers and see where they've done sampling. And each site has their own point person at Eagle and cleanup plan. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more too about some of Michigan waters and, in our Great Lakes. This picture is really kind of a shocking photo. It looks just like shaving cream. This is Lake Huron, taken by one of our community members in Oscoda. And it's not shaving cream, obviously. It's actually PFAS foam. And one of the things, you really can't see PFAS, right? Most of the time. But the one way that you can is through the surface water foam. It kind of lives on the surface of the water, and then when it gets there's wind or certain weather, it'll create this really foamy kind of residue. And so in Oscoda, it has been really noticeable. And we actually helped do some sampling with Oscoda residents of this foam to figure out how much PFAS were showing up in order to do some advocacy efforts and get better awareness and signage that, this stuff is dangerous. You should not, if you ever see foam on a lake, even less than this, you really shouldn't swim in it or even touch it. And if you do, really directly wash your hands. Um, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services just this year updated their Eat Safe Fish guides. And so in addition to PFAS, they look at PCBs and mercury, but the Ecology Center through our PFAS Action Network, wanted to kind of look and see where are the advisories just for PFOS, because that's how they do the advisories for PFAS, just one chemical, PFOS. And so we made a map, and we're kind of just getting it off the ground right now, just to kind of highlight where in Michigan these consumption advisories are. The red dots are where there's do not eat the fish in certain water bodies, and the yellow is just, it's okay to eat the fish sometimes, like there's a certain amount of servings per month. And so the guides really go through every detail of that, but they're just lists. And so we were really thinking like, well, it would be more accessible for people if they could actually look at a map. And so we're developing this map so people can just zoom in, click on the dot, and see kind of where an advisory is. But the bigger point, right, is that people are eating fish. They're going fishing. It's a rural and urban issue. Plenty of people fish in Detroit, in northern Michigan. We're really a state that's known for a lot of that. And this chemical and many other chemicals really do affect the way of life for many people, and obviously the ecosystem as well as fish. There's many studies about how it's impacting fish, um, and kind of the next generation. So what are we doing about all this? Because it definitely is a thing. I work so much on PFAS and think about it all the time. And if it's everywhere and it's in all of us, I think some of us feel like there's nothing you can do. What are we doing? And I feel that way sometimes. And so what really has helped kind of move the work and create hope that we can make this really take on this issue is through a network of community members. And so, like I said, the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network was started by two people who have been impacted directly by PFAS and came to the Ecology Center, as well as National Wildlife Federation and the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. And we all got together about 5 years ago and thought, well, how can we bring more impacted people to this conversation? So it's not just coming from people like me, people who are doing policy and research. I mean, all of that is very important. But really, we need more people who have really struggled with this issue personally to tell their stories and why this matters, and get lawmakers to actually listen to what people who are most impacted, really what are their priorities, and what should lawmakers be doing to help them with their health, hold polluters accountable, et cetera. So we do a lot of that policy. There's people from all over Michigan and a few other Great Lakes states in our group. And this picture was taken at the National PFAS conference that we held in Ann Arbor last year. And so we bring people together to prioritize our policies. We do a lot of trainings to educate community members and the broad public about what is PFAS and kind of what are the different areas of study that are going on. And we do a lot of education. And this is just a map we put together, just showing right now all the different communities that are part of our network. And we really would like to grow this network too. And that's been a big priority for us, because if you compare this to where the MPART map was of all the different contaminated sites, there's a lot more sites out there that we have members. And so how do we actually reach more people who may have gotten a letter in the mail and think, oh, my water is contaminated, and are, not sure where to turn to or what to do. We want to be a resource for those people, because there's so many others that have gone through the same thing. So we're really focusing on outreach right now. And if anyone on this call would like to be more involved with our network, I can give you the information of how to do that. But yeah, I mentioned we work on state advocacy. This is a couple photos from earlier this year with meetings with lawmakers. Sandy Winstall is the co-chair. She's the one in West Michigan I mentioned, and she's really been instrumental in getting some of her state lawmakers, representative and state senator, to kind of take action on these issues and really start listening more. So this is a picture of her and her neighbors at like an in-district coffee meeting with a lawmaker. And then the other photo is a press event. She worked with her state senator to introduce a bill about getting better testing for PFAS in blood, and introducing bipartisan legislation where the state would have a program that if you were exposed in certain counties in West Michigan, that you could for free you could get your blood tested, because it's not covered by insurance, and a lot of people kind of are in the dark about how much PFAS is in their blood, and then what to do about that. How do you actually, if you know the number, what level are you kind of at risk for certain types of diseases and things. And yeah, so we did this press event, and I think that's a really good thing to keep going. We also work on federal advocacy. These are some photos in the last year where we met with, you could see Gary Peters in there, Congressman Kildee and Lisa Slotkin. We had some other impacted community members from Minnesota join. There's Mark Rufio in there. He's a somewhat famous celebrity. He's really taken this on as an issue because he was in the movie Dark Waters, which is about the PFAS contamination in West Virginia, one of the first high-profile cases. So it's been a really interesting journey, I think, for people once they start meeting others who are doing this. Advocates from all over the country are working on PFAS. So if anything, that feels like the most hopeful or positive thing about all of this work is that there's just so many people tackling this and trying to ban PFAS, help impacted people, do a lot of research, figure out more health effects. And one of those things that we were really involved in was last year, our coalition was really instrumental with other impacted communities helping finalize the first ever national drinking water standards for PFAS. So we did a lot of advocacy and outreach to the EPA and the White House, and it was a really big deal. We've since then had really sort of unfortunate, many of you probably know this, but that there's been some rollbacks on these PFAS standards in the new administration, and the EPA, getting a lot of their science challenged if these PFAS standards are going to stay. And so we still have two, PFOS and PFOA, but in the beginning of this presentation, I said there's over 15,000, right? And so we're moving at a really, really slow pace to be regulating these chemicals. And from our perspective, we really believe in, the precautionary principle, and thinking if we know enough about a certain amount of PFAS to know that some of these are really harmful to our health, and they're all based in a similar class of chemicals, we really should be changing our structure and thinking, well, let's not put it on the market until it's proven that it's safe, instead of putting these chemicals on the market and then figuring out later if they're safe or not, and then having to deal with all of the health and environmental effects. And I think that was made really clear at the beginning of this presentation. I thank you for that. But that's the Ecology Center's approach. A lot of us working in this area, it just makes common sense, right? That we wouldn't put things out there without knowing whether they're safe. But we are up against a lot of powerful interests and money and businesses, and the chemical industry themselves are just extremely powerful in politics. And so that makes this work challenging. And so I think really what we really want is that everybody to tell their stories about this, because that, as we've seen in many movements and many environmental movements, that really does make a difference over the long term, is that there's many more people who can be powerful than these chemical companies that are really just in it for profit. And so there's lots more I could say about PFAS, but I kind of was just kind of asked to give an overview about it. And I know our other speakers will give more details about some of the research things, but this is how you can find me. I'm at the Ecology Center and through the Great Lakes PFAS Action Network. If you're interested in learning more, you can sign up for our email listservs. We have a Facebook page that you can find, or you just contact me directly. And if you want to talk more about what we do. Thank you again for having me and for just bringing up this really important issue of PFAS.